My name is James Talberg, and I'm excited to have with me today Ruslan Bortnik, political scientist, political expert, and the director of Ukrainian Institute of Politics. Ruslan, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, James. It's a pleasure for me.
Ruslan, I want to talk today about something that I don't hear a lot of experts and a lot of people discussing nowadays, the after-war world for Ukraine. And I understand that right now the main focus is on the ceasefire, on how to stop the war, how to stop the mass destruction in Ukraine. But I think we're getting into a critical point where we have to start discussing how the after war will look like for Ukraine. In terms of the redevelopment of the country, how it's going to look like, what it's going to present, how it's going to function, etc., etc., etc. And I want to break it down into two departments. First department, I'm really curious because you're living in Ukraine, you're living in Kiev. Is there an internal request from the citizen of Ukraine to start these discussions? Are they curious to know how the after war will look like? In what country they're going to live when the war will be stopped, when the ceasefire will be achieved, when the peace agreement will be achieved, how the life and the reality for Ukrainians will look like after they achieve peace. And from a different perspective, I also want to discuss if Ukrainian allies are having any plan or planning anything in terms of redeveloping Ukraine. If Western allies have any plans, if Chinese partners are interested in investing into redevelopment of Ukraine. So if we can look into that question from these two perspectives, one, if there's already an internal discussion along Ukrainians, what country we're going to build after the war and how it's going to look like, and if Western and other partners of Ukraine have any interest to invest into Ukraine after the war is ending.
Oh, huge amount of questions, and all questions are very, very important. If I lose something in my answers, please
bring it up.
Bring me back to the questions. Of course, we have a lot of discussion about the future of Ukraine, and this is the main social request for now. It's a picture of a future Ukraine, but a different think tanks, different political and social platforms, international conference and internal conference are raising this question. But at the same time, it's very difficult to prepare something real because we have lack of principles, lack of real things on which we have a lack of field and foods to prepare something real, because we don't understand what will be the general role of Ukraine in the future. It absolutely depends, the future of Ukraine, it absolutely depends on the peace agreement of its absence. If we are talking about the Ukrainian-Russian war, it also absolutely depends of which place Ukraine will achieve in the whole geopolitical map, because the frontier country or the buffer country, like it is for now, it means that we need to keep the strong army. We need to decrease the human rights. We need to a very strong, powerful governance. We will be very dependent on an external support
help
and so on. It's a one kind of country. It's a country like an army. Country army style, or it's a country which became an army, and the other style, of course, if Ukraine will be again the transfer country or transit country. Our country was founded 1,000 years ago, Rus or Kiev Rus, it depends what historians do you like. This term depends. It was founded like a transfer trade country, because our country was made on the road from Normans to Greeks through the Dnieper River, and the most successful time in our history, Ukraine was a transfer or train country. It was country with the crossroads, trade roads were crossing, were preparing to bring some goods or services to the west or to the east. Of course, if Ukraine will be neutral transfer country, it means we don't need such a big army. We need a very good developed regions,
Infrastructure, good
very
roads, good
developed.
railroads.
Yeah, everything. We need a democracy because democracy gives us a political balance when the different kinds of economical interest will be preserved in every different moment. So and we need a huge amount of population. It's another type of society, another type of country. And of course, if Ukraine will be broken, if Ukraine will capitulate in the future, for example, it will be a part of Russia. It will be a part of Russian society, but also it will be a frontier, but the
A
eastern
buffer zone
frontier
for Russia.
for Russia. And of course, it's a miracle scenario of Ukrainian victory in this moment. But just imagine something happened in Russia. Putin died, Russian army collapsed, and something. It will be also a quite different country. It will be a new kingdom, something like a new kingdom, like a middle-sized or even bigger-sized European states with a very huge army, with a very huge respect in the world. So the kind of solution, the resolution for Ukrainian-Russian conflicts will be the frame of the future of Ukrainian state and the society. So it's extremely difficult now to find the answers for your questions about the future of Ukraine, because these answers, this frame of answers, now is prepared in some rooms in White House or Kremlin or somewhere else.
Basically, I just want to summarize all your points. We have four directions that Ukraine can go into. The first direction is that if the conflict will remain approximately at the same intensity, and Ukraine will transfer into an official buffer zone or frontier, like you've mentioned, between the West and the East. For people that are watching us, I'll just give a little bit of a background. We had a lot of these discussions that the world is going into an empire's world when we will have 5-6 major players, and between those major players, we'll have frontiers. So in Europe, for example, Ukraine can play that card of being a frontier between the West and the East. And in that scenario, Ukraine will have low population, low manufacturing, factory, industrial capacities, and it, just like you've mentioned, is just going to be a hired army that will maintain the balance between East and West, and whatever conflict they'll have, they'll resolve it on behalf of Ukraine inside Ukraine, so it doesn't have to go either into the Western Empire or the Eastern Empire. So this is the first direction. The second direction, which is personally my favorite, it's if Ukraine, and you've mentioned during the history that was the most prosperous time for Ukraine, for the Ukrainian-led, for the Ukrainian people, when the country becomes a logistical hub where goods from the East are transferred to the West, from West to the East, and we have amazing infrastructure, because to maintain all these logistical goals, logistical transfers, you need to have an incredibly good infrastructure. Then you have to have businesses that support all these people, that support all these infrastructural projects. And as you've mentioned, you'll need to have democracy, because every player that transfer their goods or uses Ukraine as a logistical hub, their ideas have to be presented, protected, and have a voice inside Ukraine. So I think those are two realistic, if we can call them, I don't have a word right now, but those are like the more practical projects that Ukraine can go into. And then we have two other options, which are more based on luck. If Ukraine either wins or Ukraine loses, and this is a little bit harder to calculate, because as you've mentioned, we can't really predict it, because this is going to be mostly individual case scenario, as you've mentioned. Putin dies, and then Ukraine becomes an Eastern empire because they'll be able to move and shift faster into the occupying Ukrainian lands and taking control over the Russian. I wouldn't say I don't want to see Ukraine getting into Russian territory, but they can just position their influence on the Russian territory because Russia will be in destruction. And we've seen that before. We've seen in history how Russia can collapse and get into a dozen of years of kind of like a sleepy state. So I want to break down the first two, and I want to ask you which project, if we can call it that way, Western and Russian side are interested to have Ukraine. Like, does West interested to have Ukraine as a frontier, or West is interested to have Ukraine as a logistical hub? Does Russia is interested in having Ukraine as a frontier just to have a buffer zone between Russia and the West, or Russia wants a logistical hub? And for those who will want to say, well, Russia doesn't need that logistical hub, they can transfer their goods without Ukraine. Russia do need that logistical hub. Russia have been using Ukraine since the break of the Soviet Union as a logistical hub to sell their goods and to sell their natural resources through Ukraine. They were doing a lot of money laundering that got from Russia to Ukraine and then later entered into European Union and Western countries. So Russia does need, and Russia has been using Ukraine in that perspective for the first 20 years after the break of the Soviet Union. So what do you think West is interested in terms of Ukraine future and Russia as well?
I think the level of trust, the low level of trust between the West and Russia makes the scenario of transfer zone, of hub zone, trade zone between the West and Russia makes this scenario very low, because Russia and West are trying to take or to keep the formal and informal control over the Ukrainian state now. It's also because of the lack of the trust between the sides. No one, no Russia, no West are able to make now the agreement on Ukraine. And this is the main problem. We have a lot of discussion and a lot of very bright, very light political rhetoric, but it's only words. It's only words. In the deep of these words, there is an only interest to keep the control or to take the control over. Maybe Trump and Putin will resolute this problem in the future. Maybe they will try and find a balance, and if they will be able to try to find this balance, it means the prospect of Ukraine and like a trade state will be on the table again. But for now, it's more possible scenarios, unfortunately, for Ukrainians especially. It's a continuation of this conflict, and war and military conflict is only a part of this much wider conflict, which also includes a political competition, economical competition, technological competition, and a lot of locations around the world, starting from Ukraine and in the Latin America and Cuba and so on. So this military phase could be frozen, but general competition will continue, and it means that Ukraine will be under the control of one of the side, and most possible scenario, it will be unfortunately the buffer zone, one of the side. The buffer zone over one of the side. Unfortunately, I don't believe very much on the scenario of a new geopolitical balance around of Ukraine. Is the most visual, the most scenario for Ukraine. But I think for Ukrainians, it could be much better to find a resolution, something like Switzerland and another Austria after the Second World War, and another military neutral countries, the countries of cross-border many interests, the countries of trade, of countries of negotiation, and so on. Very, very tough question for me. This is not fair game, of course, around Ukraine, and there will not be a fair. Unfortunately, there will not be a fair the end of this game.
Why can't West and West as United States and European nations and countries achieve a geopolitical balance with Russia in terms of the Ukrainian situation? Why there is a low trust level between West and the East?
Because of general competition, because of the situation between the United States and China, and in this case, Russia plays on Chinese side also. Everybody understood it, and because of Ukraine is still very rich country. If you are talking the natural resources and other resources, and there are a lot of resources in which our allies and enemies are interested in. There is still a lot of these resources. So we are not a very exhausted country in these terms, of course. And we are still able to pay. We could be Robert in this situation. And it's also one more reason for the countries and the blocks of countries which are competing around Ukraine to continue this fight. Moreover, we are a very big country, and including our country to one or to another side changes geopolitical balances very significant. It's so any decision, any final decision, even if we are talking about the decision of a buffer country or trade country, makes a serious influence on geopolitical balance in EU, Europe. And after this decision, after such an agreement, Europe will be another again. Just imagine the situation that, for example, if it's Trump and Putin found solution on Ukraine and made a decision to make Ukraine neutral, to make Ukraine a buffer country between them. But the United States and the West are keeping the control over the political system and economical system in this situation. It will provoke Russia to prepare for the new attacks. It will provoke Russia to make a sustainable instability on the borders. It will provoke Ukraine to provoke Russia to pull the Ukraine for the hands every time when they are wanted to make connection to the West. Or Ukraine will be the same situation. Ukrainians will be living in the feelings of revenge, of coming back Ukrainian territories, getting back Ukrainian territories, and to make a revenge for that losses Ukraine kept during the war, and so on. We are too rich, we are too big, and the competition, geopolitical competition, is too complicated. It's not only Russia and the United States or Russia and the Europe to find a general solution, final solution on the Ukrainian case, unfortunately.
So if Ukraine is kind of stuck in that loop where bigger players, bigger powers are kind of like trying to push their agenda, push their interest, and they're trying to resolve it or achieve it on behalf of the Ukrainians, can Ukraine and Ukrainians output themselves from that political game? Can they say, well, as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, we don't want to take part in it anymore. We're not fighting. We want to be neutral. We want to become a neutral state, as you've mentioned, Austria or Switzerland, go find a different frontier. Can Ukraine, and under any possible scenario from the inside, from like the Ukrainian core, say we're out, we're not playing this game anymore?
In ideal world or scenario, it could be, or in scenario of responsible political elites. because Ukrainians are divided like a world around us. We are also divided. We have passionate part from 20 to 30 persons who are standing on continuation of the war, and we have a silent majority who are standing against the continuation of the war, like it was the world around of us. And we are able to make only a common decision on during the referendums or elections under the management of very responsible political elites. But we are not able, because we are a people with near the 30 million of population. We are not able to perceive every Ukrainians to accept any scenario of development of the situation. So we need to do a good governance, a very responsible governance, even sacrificing governance to take Ukraine off this situation. To switch all this conflict by Ukrainian hands only. Also very hard, also very hard scenario. But all I said before, it doesn't mean that there will not be a ceasefire. Ceasefire is quite possible, but ceasefire will be only a pause. Ceasefire without final resolution of the conflict will be only a pause before the new conflict. 5-10 years, and there will be a new conflict, because ceasefire means Ukraine is a buffer country, frontier country, and it's a formal or informal end of the West world, or in the West world, and in this borderlands, the borderland of the West or the East. In this borderlands, every time will be conflicts, and every time will be a geopolitical competition.
You've mentioned that for Ukraine to output itself out of that situation of global powers trying to use Ukraine for their geopolitical agenda, that you need a responsible government, you need more unity inside Ukrainian society. And I'm assuming that country has to be financially strong. And you said Ukraine has potential for that, because Ukraine still has a lot of resources, and 30 million population. It's still a big population, right? So, and you also have mentioned that a ceasefire is possible. I mean, right now it looks like the Trump's administration is really pushing on that ceasefire. I think Russians probably need a ceasefire as well, because their economy is not doing well. From one perspective, everybody's interested to continue the war, to achieve a final resolution, because a final resolution is more productive and successful for all of the sides, for Ukrainians, for Russians, for the West. But at the same time, all of the sides are somewhat exhausted, and everybody will be interested to recope and rebuild their military and financial capacities. So I just want to try and visualize here with you a map where Ukraine takes that ceasefire that you're saying that is not very profitable or successful for Ukraine. But let's say Ukraine takes that ceasefire for the next 5-10 years. And during that 5-10 years, Ukraine, just visualizing here, right? Because you mentioned that we need responsible government for that. But during these 5-10 years, Ukraine rebuild itself, right? We have about 10 million of Ukrainian population that fled the country will come back, right? Ukrainian government can create some sort of social programs to bring those people back. These people will come back. They have Western experience, Western allies, different worldwide allies create for them interesting financial investment projects that they will invest. I know that people and countries will invest. If you stop the war in a year, everybody's going to forget about the war, right? When you're saying that people need to understand that if we achieve a ceasefire, it's only for 5-10 years, but Ukraine will remain a frontier, and then the war will happen again, because there is no final resolution. So like the West and East will continue to compete, right? But this, you're speaking as a geopolitical expert. Most people, most companies, most countries will forget that the war has happened probably a year or 2 years later. I'm saying it from the perspective that if 2 years, a year after a ceasefire, Ukraine creates interesting financial projects that people will be interested to invest, they will come and invest, right? So if we bring all the Ukrainians that have fled the country, if we create projects that are interesting for investments, Ukraine can become again economically strong. Ukraine can become again a 40 million country populated. And then during these 5-10 years, building a more responsible government that is interested in a prosperous future for Ukraine. And then after these 5-10 years of ceasefire, be like, you know what, we're strong enough militarily, we're strong enough economically, we don't want to be a buffer zone anymore. And we're not going to be a good buffer zone because we can probably change the geopolitical situation for players that want to play their political game inside Ukraine. What I'm trying to say by that is that if Russia will try to push on Ukraine again, Ukraine is again strong enough as it used to be in 2022, at the end of 2022 and at the beginning of 2023, to the point where that can collapse Russia. So Russia can think twice, do we really want to solve our geopolitical agenda in Ukraine, where that can push us back to our territory? Same as the West. West militarily is not strong. If West will try to do any comeback and push the East again, that can like play back in the other direction as well. What do you think about that case scenario? Is it realistic? Is it practical? And if it is, would that actually be potentially playing out that way?
Who is interested in this scenario? How
Ukrainians. Ukrainians.
Are Ukrainians capable to find out this scenario, to figure out this scenario?
If they will listen to this podcast, if they're rational and if they want to achieve a successful and peaceful country for themselves and for the future generation, they should think that way.
So sorry for my pessimism, but it's not pessimism, it's realism, I hope. But we had this best situation in previous more than 20 years of Ukrainian independence. More than 20 years, starting from 1991, from the collapse of Soviet Union, Ukraine was independent and peaceful country, and there were no any significant investments into Ukraine at this moment. Only a huge Ukrainian money withdrawn from Ukraine every year. It was like a drain bucket. All the time. It's not because of the war, but because of corruption, ineffective management, and because of absence. This is the main question: absence of the answer for the question, what is the geopolitical place of Ukraine? Ukraine, to be honest, in this moment, this war on Ukraine started not in 2014. And even not in 2022. It started in 1991. The absence of a geopolitical place of Ukraine, instability of this place, very often changing of the direction of development of Ukraine. Kuchman, Yanukovych, it's a one direction, for example. And Yushchenko, Poroshenko, Zelensky, in another direction, for example, changing this direction very often, placed us in the situation of a competition, geopolitical competition on Ukraine, and then it leads us to the military war, like an explosion, like a continuation of the geopolitical competition. If the geopolitical sides are willing to continue this geopolitical competition, there is interest to keep Ukraine in this undescribable place, uncertain place in geopolitical map. If they are willing to finish this war, this conflict, and their competition in Europe, they need to find Ukraine very certain place in geopolitical map, like for Switzerland, Austria, and not many other countries, and in this moment. We have a war, geopolitical competition in Ukraine, which started from in 1991, not now. And so I'm some pessimistic on the scenario which you described, because even after the ceasefire, no one big investors can bring a real big money to Ukraine, because he or she is just will not be sure about the future of this country if we are talking about the length of the time for 5, 10, even much more time. Of course, for Ukrainians, any ceasefire, it's a very good. It's a very good. It's a time to take a breath. It's a time to rebuild, to time to reunite the families, and it's a great time. Any methods of how to stop this war, it's a very good for average Ukrainians, for the concrete exact people. But if you are talking about the future, in the best scenario will be in 2015. In the ever best scenario, we will be in 2013. But if the geopolitical competition in Ukraine will go on, only the question of the time when the new conflict, no, new war will explode in the future.
The history goes in cycles, right? As you mentioned before, Ukraine has its prosperous time when it was a Kiev and Rus, and it used to be the logistical hub. For how long do you think that cycle of destruction and the competition between the West and East will continue for the next 10, 15, 20 years? When is the next cycle for Ukraine, if we're talking about more realistic perspective, for Ukraine to become again a logistical hub, a trade nation?
I think the hot phase of the war can continue for 10 or 15 years more. If you are talking about the geopolitical competition around Ukraine, it also depends of many factors. I don't know, but we have examples, very ordinary examples of geopolitical competitions. Continuous may continue starting from 30 years even more. For example, a geopolitical competition between Great Britain and Russia continues 300 years. Between Russia and the United States, Russia, we are also saying Soviet Union continues
67 years.
More than 70 years. And we have a lot such examples when these geopolitical competitions in the hot or cold or middle forms are continuing very long time if we're talking about the time of our life.
So if we're speaking from a realistical perspective, the hot phase of that competition can continue for the next 10, 15 years. So we're speaking about 2035, 2040, Ukraine will have a realistic chance to rebuild itself during the cold phase.
I hope the ceasefire will be figured out this year. I hope. But our calculation gives near 40% of probability of this scenario, not 51, unfortunately. But I have a hope that Trump will fight with Putin, will find a temporary solution for this conflict. Of course, if the ceasefire will be achieved, it means increasing of internal political competition in Ukraine, new elections, and so on. But I think this pause could continue till exactly till the end of the presidency of the Trump. We are talking about 2028, and maybe till the end of the presidency of the Putin, maybe even some more time. Then we will be in a situation when we need to find a new solution. It doesn't mean that war will start again for 100%. No, it means that we will need to find a new solution, and it will be also a continuation of the pause, or it will be again the hot conflict.
Ruslan, Thank you so much for your comments today and your thoughts. And I appreciate your perspective. It's how you open up the topics to understand the situation and create a potential visual map how things going to play out in the future. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you, friends, for subscribing, liking, and commenting our blogs. Thank you.